The Mr. Olympia, held on October 10, 1998, went down in history as one of the most pivotal moments in professional bodybuilding. The stage was the legendary Madison Square Garden, packed to the rafters with over 5,000 fans, creating an electric, almost overwhelming atmosphere. This wasn't just another contest. It was a night that promised to change everything. The massive anticipation came from one key factor. For the first time in years, the throne was empty. Dorian Yates, six-time consecutive champion, had officially announced his retirement. Years of accumulated injuries, chronic pain, and a body pushed to its absolute limits had brought an end to the era of the man who redefined bodybuilding with the mass monster philosophy. And one question echoed around the world: who would be the next king? Throughout most of the 1990s, the name Dorian Yates was synonymous with total dominance. His dense, thick, brutally powerful physique raised the standard for size to levels never seen before. With his exit, it wasn't just about crowning a new champion. It was about deciding which direction the sport would take next. More aesthetics? More mass? Or something entirely different? The mood inside Madison Square Garden reflected that uncertainty. Unlike other years, there was no clear consensus among fans, athletes, or experts. For the first time in a long while, several names had a legitimate shot at winning. That turned the 1998 Mr. Olympia into a true battleground, where every pose could help define the future of the sport. With Dorian Yates officially gone, the 1998 Mr. Olympia became one of the most unpredictable additions in history. For the first time in years, there was no universally agreed-upon favorite. Instead, there was a group of elite athletes, each representing a different ideal of the perfect physique, all ready to fight for the vacant throne. At the top of the favorites list was Flex Wheeler. Fresh off winning the 1998 Arnold Classic, he was seen as the embodiment of perfect symmetry. His physique flowed almost like art, with flawless proportions and smooth, aesthetic lines. To many experts, Flex was the logical successor to Yates, not because of sheer brutality, but because of the visual perfection that judges and fans loved. Right alongside him came the threat of pure size, Nasser El Sombaty. Massive, dense, and visually intimidating, Nasser carried the reputation of being the biggest man on stage. His extreme volume made comparisons feel unfair, and many believed that if he nailed his conditioning, he would be nearly impossible to beat. Another major contender was Kevin Levrone. Known for his explosive physique and famous for showing up incredibly full on show day, Levrone had a reputation as someone who could beat anyone when everything clicked. Sean Ray, meanwhile, stood as the symbol of consistency. Always near the top, always competitive, always dangerous, even without the same hype as the others. And then there was Ronnie Coleman. To the general audience, he was still the underdog. He was coming off a modest 9th-place finish at the previous Olympia, but there was something different about him. An impressive string of victories throughout 1998 and a level of physical development that very few had fully noticed yet. Before stepping on the stage at the 1998 Mr. Olympia, Ronnie Coleman was already completely outside the norm. Unlike most competitors, he didn't live exclusively off bodybuilding. Ronnie worked full-time as a police officer in Arlington, Texas, balancing exhausting shifts with brutally intense workouts at a no-frills gym, far removed from the glamour of bodybuilding's major hubs. Between 1997 and 1998, his physical transformation was shocking. While many still saw him as a talented but inconsistent competitor, Ronnie was quietly building a physique the sport had never seen before. His progress didn't come from fancy methods or cutting-edge techniques, but from a straightforward philosophy: insanely heavy weights, basic execution, and absolute consistency, day in and day out. Deep squats, monstrous deadlifts, and leg presses with numbers that sounded almost unreal were part of his routine. Ronnie believed that big muscles required big weights, and no one lived that belief more intensely than he did. This training style didn't just add size. It created a level of muscle density that was hard to match, especially in his legs and back. When he stepped onto the stage in New York, the shock was immediate. Ronnie weighed around 114 kilograms, about 251 pounds, in contest shape, displaying a rare combination of size, hardness, and muscle thickness. It wasn't just a big physique. It was a physique that radiated raw power in every single pose. Still, very few people fully understood what they were witnessing at that moment. To most, Ronnie Coleman was still just a rising competitor. But quietly, his physique already carried all the signs of someone on the verge of changing the course of bodybuilding history forever. To truly grasp the impact of this event, it's important to understand how judging worked. The competition strictly followed IFBB standards, divided into clearly defined rounds designed to evaluate the physique as a whole. Nothing was decided by a single pose or one isolated moment. The athlete's first interaction with the judges came during the relaxed poses. Even without full flexing, this round was critical, as it revealed overall structure, natural proportions, and balance between muscle groups. For many competitors, ground was gained, or lost, right there, before the mandatory poses even began. Next came the mandatory poses, the real trial by fire. Front double biceps, side chest, rear lat spread, abs and thighs. Each pose mercilessly exposed strengths and weaknesses. Deeply etched backs, dense legs, full arms, and a tight, controlled waist made all the difference. Here, size without definition wasn't enough, just as definition without visual impact didn't cut it either. After that, the athletes performed their individual routines, where charisma, flow, and stage presence came into play. It wasn't just about muscle, it was about performance. How an athlete moved, commanded the stage, and connected with the crowd influenced the overall perception, especially in such a tightly contested event. Finally, the top 6 advanced to the final pose down, a direct and almost chaotic showdown where confidence and stage awareness were decisive. Scoring was based on comparisons. The lower the total points accumulated, the better the placing. At the Mr. Olympia, it wasn't about making the fewest mistakes. It was about imposing yourself in every aspect of what's known as the complete package. Right at the start of the Mr. Olympia prejudging, the favoritism seemed confirmed. Flex Wheeler stepped on stage with an extremely polished physique, clean lines, and eye-catching symmetry. Every movement looked calculated, and the judge's initial read reflected that perfectly. After the first round, Flex took the lead with a comfortable advantage. His mix of proportions, conditioning, and flow immediately put pressure on the rest of the field. For many inside Madison Square Garden, that opening felt like the beginning of a smooth, confident march toward the long-awaited title. Meanwhile, Ronnie Coleman sat in third place. Despite his impressive size, the general feeling was that he still hadn't switched on dominance mode. Compared to Flex's refined aesthetics, Ronnie looked rougher, undeniably powerful, but not yet the man to beat. The specialized media reinforced that narrative. Commentary revolved around the idea that if Flex maintained that condition through the finals, it would be extremely hard for anyone to catch him. The contest seemed to be following a predictable script, something rare for such a highly anticipated Olympia. But bodybuilding has an unspoken rule. Early judgments don't guarantee final victories. And although few noticed it at the time, something was quietly starting to take shape behind the scenes. It was during the mandatory poses that the 1998 Mr. Olympia began to shift direction. When Ronnie Coleman, Flex Wheeler, and Nasser El Sanbadi stood side by side, the direct comparison revealed something many hadn't fully recognized yet. In the rear double biceps, the impact was immediate. Ronnie's back seemed to take over the entire stage. Thickness, density, and depth created an almost intimidating image. It wasn't just width, it was three-dimensional mass, something that grabbed the attention of even the most experienced judges. In the lat spread, the difference became even clearer. Ronnie flared his lats as if he were expanding the stage itself, while Flex, known for aesthetic perfection, didn't show the same visual dominance he had displayed months earlier. The flawless shape was still there, but without the same spark seen at the Arnold Classic he had won earlier that year. At that moment, a psychological factor started to creep in. Flex appeared to underestimate Ronnie, treating the comparison as just another manageable battle. But bodybuilding doesn't forgive lapses in focus. Right there, without any official announcement, without cheers or trophies, the balance started to shift. On paper, the lead still existed, but on stage, something had changed. And anyone paying close attention could feel it. The contest that once looked settled had just entered dangerous territory for the favorite. As the comparisons went on, a different energy began to take over Madison Square Garden. The crowd, locked in on every pose, realized the expected script was unraveling right in front of them. This was no longer just a technical battle. Emotion, surprise, and tension filled the air. The chant started softly, then quickly grew louder. Ronnie, Ronnie, echoed through the arena, creating constant pressure. With every new comparison, that roar seemed to fuel Ronnie Coleman's confidence, while the crowd made it crystal clear whose side they were on at that critical moment. Even though he was still trailing in total points, Ronnie had dramatically closed the gap. What once looked like a comfortable lead for Flex Wheeler had now turned into a head-to-head fight, pose by pose, detail by detail. The contest stopped being predictable and became dangerous. That crowd support had a clear psychological effect. Ronnie began posing with more authority, owning the stage, while Flex no longer projected the same confidence he had earlier. In competitions this tight, reading the moment emotionally can matter just as much as the physique itself. At that point, the event was no longer a battle amongst several contenders. It had become a clear duel between two men. When the final pose down began, the night reached its most intense moment. There were no complex calculations left, no room for gentle interpretation. This was pure confrontation, stage awareness, and dominance. Ronnie Coleman knew exactly that, and he stepped in with the posture of someone who had no intention of leaving any doubts. Ronnie went straight to center stage and repeatedly challenged Flex Wheeler. Pose after pose, he planted himself right next to his rival, showcasing his mass, density, and overwhelming physical presence. It wasn't just muscle, it was a clear visual message. Look at me. In a pose down, that attitude matters just as much as the physique. Flex, on the other hand, chose a different strategy. Instead of facing Ronnie head-on, he began moving away, walking around the stage. The idea was to project control and leadership, as if the others had to follow him. But in that specific context, the read was the opposite. To many judges and fans, it felt like avoidance, not dominance. With every new attempt at confrontation, Ronnie followed Flex, closing the distance and forcing the direct comparison. The contrast between Ronnie's brutal density and Flex's refined but less commanding aesthetics became more obvious by the second. The crowd reacted, the judges watched silently, and the tension only kept building. When the pose down ended, the overall feeling was unmistakable. Something had permanently changed. Ronnie had won the most important round of the night. When the final scores were tallied, he edged past Flex and took the lead at the exact moment it mattered most. The contest that began with a clear favorite now had a new champion about to be crowned. After hours of tension, razor-thin comparisons, and an electrifying pose down, the verdict was finally set. With 32 points, Ronnie Coleman claimed his first Mr. Olympia title, completing one of the most dramatic comebacks ever seen on bodybuilding's biggest stage. Every point reflected a hard-fought battle, decided in the details and sealed by final dominance. Right behind him, with 35 points, was Flex Wheeler. The pre-show favorite, Flex paid the price for not bringing his absolute best version when it mattered most. Even so, second place cemented his legacy as one of the most complete and respected physiques in history, even on a bitter night. Third place went to Nasser El Sanbadi, whose extreme size impressed, but wasn't enough to put him in direct contention for the title. Kevin Levrone followed in fourth, Sean Ray in fifth, and Chris Cormier rounded out the top six in one of the most competitive Olympias of all time. Beyond the eternal prestige, the results also reflected the sport's growing financial power. The total prize money reached $300,000, a significant amount for the era, highlighting the commercial strength of the 1998 Mr. Olympia. The champion took home $110,000, along with the iconic Sando Trophy. But more than numbers, that final lineup symbolized a shift. Bodybuilding had just crowned a new name at the very top of the world. And in that moment, very few could imagine that this wasn't just a single victory, but the opening chapter of a historic reign that was only just beginning. The ending of the 1998 Mr. Olympia was built in silence. Before the final announcement, there was a long, almost cruel, pause that made time feel like it had slowed down inside Madison Square Garden. Athletes stood frozen, the crowd held its breath, and thousands of people tried to read the outcome from nothing more than body language and breathing. When Flex Wheeler's name was announced as second place, the impact was instant. In a split second, Ronnie Coleman knew he had won, but his mind couldn't keep up with his body. His legs gave out, and Ronnie collapsed on stage, overwhelmed by an emotional explosion he couldn't contain. The tears came hard and uncontrollable, almost visceral. It wasn't just joy. It was relief, disbelief, and the release of years of quiet, relentless work. Fellow competitors tried to lift him up, called his name, touched his shoulders, but Ronnie seemed glued to the floor, as if he needed a few more seconds to accept that it was real. The crowd's reaction was deafening. The entire arena stood up, chanting his name nonstop. There was no division, no controversy in that moment, only recognition. The audience knew they were witnessing something rare, a genuine, human victory, raw and unfiltered, with no acting and no facade. That scene transcended decades and became one of the most iconic images in bodybuilding history. More than the trophy itself, that moment revealed what the 1998 Mr. Olympia truly represented. It wasn't just the crowning of a champion. It was the validation of an underdog story that would never be forgotten. Winning the 1998 Mr. Olympia wasn't just a one-off moment of glory for Ronnie Coleman. That night marked the birth of a dynasty. What initially looked like a shocking upset quickly revealed itself as the first step in a reign that would last for years. From 1998 to 2005, Ronnie Coleman captured 8 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles, tying the historic record set by Lee Haney. But unlike previous eras, Ronnie's impact wasn't just about numbers. His physique pushed the concept of size and density to a level that simply didn't exist before him. From 1998 onward, the standard changed. Wider backs, thicker legs, fuller arms, and an almost unreal level of muscle hardness became the new benchmark. Bodybuilding had fully entered the era of the so-called mass monsters, where being aesthetic alone was no longer enough. You had to make an immediate visual statement the moment you stepped on stage. That shift influenced an entire generation of athletes. Heavier training, an extreme focus on mass and density, and a relentless pursuit of ever more intimidating physiques took over the professional scene. What Ronnie brought to that Olympia became the new bare minimum for anyone dreaming of the top. That's why the 1998 Mr. Olympia is remembered as a true turning point. It wasn't just the crowning of a champion, but the exact moment the sport changed direction. That night, Ronnie Coleman didn't just defeat his rivals, he redefined what greatness meant in modern bodybuilding. Decades later, the event is still cited as one of the most emotional and debated competitions in bodybuilding history, not only because of the close result, but because of the symbolic weight of that stage. It wasn't just a winner being decided, it was the future of the sport itself. The event clearly represented the end of an era. The definitive farewell to Dorian Yates' dominance closed the chapter of the 1990s at the exact moment a new standard was emerging. The audience witnessed that transition in real time, something rare even in major sports. At the same time, it marked the birth of an absolute icon. Ronnie Coleman, once seen as the underdog, didn't just win, he shattered expectations. His victory proved that bodybuilding's biggest stage still had room for surprises, as long as they were backed by extreme work ethic, consistency, and real evolution. The controversial nature of the result also helped keep the event alive in collective memory. Debates about aesthetics versus mass, judging criteria, stage strategy, and visual impact continue to this day. That's what turned the 1998 Olympia into a constant reference whenever the question arises: what does the ideal champion really look like? In the end, the legacy of that championship goes far beyond trophies and scorecards. It delivered a powerful message. In bodybuilding, just like in life, a written-off underdog can rise to the top. And when that happens, they don't just make the rankings, they become immortal. The 1998 Mr. Olympia wasn't just about muscles, trophies, or points. It was about believing when no one else does. It was about showing up as the long shot, hearing your name echo through the arena, and realizing every sacrifice was worth it. That's exactly why this story is still so powerful today. Now I want to hear from you. In your opinion, did Ronnie Coleman really win the toughest Olympia in history? Or do you think aesthetics should have mattered more that night? Drop your comment below. Your perspective is part of the conversation and helps the channel grow. If this video kept you hooked until the end, hit the like button right now. That tells YouTube this kind of content deserves to be recommended. And if you want to support the channel even more, consider becoming a member. You'll help keep these videos alive and get access to exclusive content as well. Make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you don't miss any epic stories like this one. Every week, we bring you new content covering the greatest moments, athletes, and behind-the-scenes stories in bodybuilding. And before you go, don't leave just yet. Another incredible video is popping up on the end screen right now. A story that connects directly to everything you just watched. Click it, stick with us, because this bodybuilding journey is far from over.